Okay, so just a quick disclaimer here before I even get into any of the content. This video is just for general information purposes. Every business is different, every individual is different, every province is different, and every city is different. So yeah, this is just for general information. I can't give specific information unless I'm working one-on-one with someone. So if you're wanting to set up a business in Canada and you want to keep it really simple, at least starting out, I've got some tips that can help you do that. The first one being to set up the business as a sole proprietorship. And a sole proprietorship is one of the types of legal structures for businesses. Other ones would be like a partnership, a cooperative, or a business corporation. But a sole proprietorship is the most simple one. It's the easiest to set up. It's the fastest to set up. It's the cheapest. It's the simplest to maintain. So that can be a really good option if you are wanting to set up a business and keep it really simple starting out. So when you set up that proprietorship, typically you're going to be registering that in the province that you live in, or at least the province that you're operating the business in. And sometimes there is an exception where you don't even have to register it. And that would be when you're operating a sole proprietorship and just using your personal legal name rather than actually having a business name. So for example, if your name is Corey Smith and you want to start a painting business and you're not giving it a business name, you're just Corey Smith and you're a painter. As a proprietorship, in most provinces, you don't even necessarily have to register that business. Whereas if you want to call your business Corey Smith Painting Services, now you have a business name. So even if it's being run as a proprietorship, you would still have to register that business name and therefore register the business. Now, when it comes to a bank account for a proprietorship, it's not necessarily needed, whereas with a corporation, it's always needed. But for a proprietorship, if you're operating that business with a business name, then you'll have to get a business bank account because you can't receive payments made out to a business name to your personal bank account. But again, if you are operating that proprietorship, just using your personal legal name, it is then possible to receive payment for business to your personal account because you're just receiving payment, in the case of a check, just made out to your personal name. However, I still think it's a really good idea to get a business bank account regardless, just to keep your personal and business transactions separate. Now with a proprietorship, even if it's a really basic one, a really small one, and it's a home-based business, typically you still will need a business license, which is different from registering the business. And again, this depends on the city, the municipality that you're operating in. But typically a business license can be obtained for, $100 or less per year. So you want to check with your local municipality what their rules and prices are for that. And then lastly, when it comes to a proprietorship, one of the bonuses and one of the ways that it allows you to have a basic and low maintenance business is when it comes to taxes. With a corporation, you're creating a separate legal entity that has to file its own taxes, whereas with a proprietorship, there's no separation. The business is tied to you, the personal entity. And when it comes to your income taxes, the income of the business and the expenses of the business are just tied in with your personal taxes. So you don't have to create this new tax return. When you file your personal income taxes every year, you just add on your revenue from business and your expenses from your business. The next tip is setting up the business as a service-based business or mostly service-based business. This just allows for lower startup costs and less dependence on suppliers and supply chains and things like that. With a service-based business, you also don't have to worry about having inventory on hand at all times, and you're more protected from inflation. The next tip is be the only employee. Maybe in the future you want to have some more employees, but starting out, if you're just wanting to keep it really simple, be the only employee in the business. There are benefits to that. For starters, you don't have to register a payroll account with the federal government of Canada. And also you probably most likely won't need to register a workers' compensation account in your province. If you're needing help with your business, but you don't actually want to hire on in-house employees, there's lots of options for hiring subcontractors. You can find local subcontractors to help you, or you can find remote ones through websites like Fiverr or Upwork. So even if you are the only employee, that will keep things really simple, but there are ways to get other people to help you with your business without actually having them as full-time employees or in-house employees in any form, and it'll save you those extra steps that I mentioned. The next tip is starting a business where you don't really need a business facility, like a retail space or a commercial space. So something like working remotely, working in the field, or working from home. Then you don't have to worry about signing a lease or buying property. Your operating costs are going to be lower, your startup costs are going to be lower, maintenance of the business is just going to be easier. So for businesses where you're working in the field, think of something like photography or coaching or videography. For businesses where you can work remotely, think of things like graphic design or video editing. And then for home-based businesses, you can think of things, even if you are seeing clients, think of things like doing nails or eyelashes or spray tan or even musical lessons or tutoring or something like that. And the next tip is just keep the business small with low risks. Maybe you're going to start small and you want to grow it, but in the beginning, if you're starting small, there are some ways to avoid even setting up a GST account with the federal government. So if your income for the business is below a certain threshold, which is typically $30,000, then you can actually avoid registering for a GST account, and therefore you don't have to collect it from your clients or remit it to the government. And the same thing goes for provincial sales taxes. And of course that depends on the province. But for some types of small businesses, you can avoid having to collect provincial sales taxes depending on the nature of your business and your income and things like that, which can be a really nice benefit starting out in some cases. In other cases, it doesn't make sense, even if you are a small business, because if you're wanting to grow, eventually you're probably going to have to start collecting those taxes. However, there are certain provinces and certain services where you may never have to charge provincial sales tax. So you'll want to learn what the rules are based on your region. And then with keeping it simple and keeping it low risk, this depends on the nature of the business, but it's nice if you can have a business where you don't really require much for insurance. Think, for example, of one that would require a lot of insurance, a business like a restaurant. A restaurant would probably want general commercial liability insurance, property insurance, maybe business interruption insurance, maybe some extra health benefit insurance for their employees and things like that. Whereas if you are just a graphic designer or you're doing video editing or something like that, or even just being like a math tutor, you probably don't need any insurance for your business. And then the last tip is starting a business that doesn't have high startup costs. There are simple businesses that still have high startup costs. Think, for example, like a car wash. A car wash is a pretty simple business, but in order to start one, it might cost you $500,000 or $1 million. Or even a construction company. It might be pretty simple in terms of what your construction company does, and maybe it's just you and a couple employees or one employee. But if you're buying vehicles and equipment and stuff, it can be really expensive. Whereas for a business like a graphic designer or a cleaner or a sports coach or a music instructor or something like that, you barely need any equipment. Oftentimes it's just, you can use your phone and your computer and just get some stationery and things like that. So that can be really nice if you can set up a business like that. It reduces the risk, it reduces the startup cost, it reduces the administrative work of the business. And it's just simpler to run a business where you're not having to maintain all that equipment and try and pay off those startup costs. And so just for a quick example, let's say that you're starting up a business as a yoga instructor or a tennis coach, and you're setting up as a proprietorship and you're just using your personal legal name. Typically, you wouldn't even have to register the business. And with a business like that, you don't really have much for startup costs. You can just typically work in the field and just go rent space as you need it. So you don't even need a facility. You'd mostly just need the business operating license. And again, because you're not creating a separate legal entity like you are with a corporation, all the income you receive from those business operations and all the expenses you have are just part of your personal income tax. So you're not filing a new return in that case. You can potentially avoid even registering for a GST account if your business is eligible based on income. You might not even need any insurance for the business. And because it's just you're not going to have to sign up for a payroll account, and you're not going to have to sign up for workers' compensation in your province. So a business like this would not only be quite simple to operate, but the whole startup process would be very cheap and very easy. So it really is possible to start up a business without much money, without much time or effort put into it. So hopefully that was helpful and just gave you some good tips for starting up a simple business in Canada. If you have any questions, you can just leave comments below, or if you want a free one-on-one consultation, I'll leave links in the comment section below to get in contact with me.